I think I showed up just before you, so.
That's all good. So, hi, everybody. Today is Wednesday, the 15th. This is the Kubernetes K8s Infra working group. I am renaming myself to Aaron of Sigbeard right now as I talk. You are all being publicly recorded and will be adhering to the Kubernetes code of conduct at this meeting by not being jerks. You can watch this posted on YouTube later. So I thought that this week it would be cool if we could go through our recurring topics first and then walk through open issues in the milestone where I tried to dump all of our action items from 2 weeks ago as we try to drive towards like opening the gates on stuff. So I believe I recognize everybody that is here. So unless anybody wants to reintroduce themselves, I will move on to billing review. Where do we stand on billing review? I know Justin showed a bunch of fancy reports last week, and typically at this point in time, Tim reads us out the standard billing report from GCP so we can hear about the resources that are spent. So unclear to me whether like Justin's fancy thing was something we would be using instead by now, or we don't have.
I don't think it's something we can use instead just yet. It wouldn't at all surprise me to hear that Justin's been very busy getting ready for KubeCon.
Shocker.
Yeah, so I'm happy to do the readout here. I haven't seen an update to that dashboard. I'm happy to do a readout from the table here, though. Top single line item is cores running to the various test clusters as we're spinning them up. That's to the tune of $69.19. And there's RAM, sorry, $35, and SSD PDs, $20, and DNS, 39 million queries. Oh, sorry, I didn't read the current month. Let me change my query, hold on. Let's say the 15th. I guess current month is close enough. 39,900,000 queries to date at $16. And load balancers, $7, and we're going down into the pennies from here. So I'd say things are still looking good, and all the costs are reasonable and going to places where we'd expect them to go.
Cool. Okay. So for AI review, I kind of feel like skipping over that and just going directly to issues that are in the milestone, if that's cool with people.
Go for it.
Okay, so that's I guess I can share my screen if that would help. You're gonna have to deal with GitHub in dark mode. I hope you'll live. Okay, GitHub in dark mode. So one of the things is we need to make sure we actually have GKE clusters available to migrate infrastructure over to. This is the umbrella issue that has to do with cluster management. So I'm going to focus on everything that has to do with cluster management for a second.
Arnaud, do you want to give an update?
So there's an issue here about burning down and recreating the clusters. I can see, and Arnaud has a work in progress PR.
I saw Arnaud on the list. Are you here?
I see Arnaud is unmuted, but I cannot hear.
Well, in his stead then, he has sent a PR, which I have not reviewed. We talked a little bit yesterday on Slack. He was looking at all the various options for cluster turnup and said he had most of them nailed down in that script. I have also been pretty busy getting ready for KubeCon, so I just haven't had a chance to look at it yet.
Oh, good. Justin's not here, so we can be thrilled that it's all Bash. Excellent. Okay.
Someday somebody's going to watch these videos and think that we actually like Bash.
Do we I don't know if you can see, I actually like laser engraved the Bash logo onto a cup here. That's where I stand with Bash. Sorry, we're really far afield here. Okay, do we feel like it's fair that we could get this script reviewed and run to a point where we actually have a cluster that's stood up with this in 2 weeks?
2 weeks is going to be pushing it just because KubeCon is the entirety of next week. And like I don't return to States until Monday, so it'll be difficult for me to like guarantee that we have this in 2 weeks. I'm going to try like hell and shoot for this, but I've got a huge backlog of things that I'm ignoring this week and next. So it's going to be a challenging week. But it's at the very tippy top of my priority list. Let's put it that way for
right.
this.
Let me ask the question this way. I feel like it might be productive for some of us to get together face to face while we are at KubeCon, possibly during the contributor summit, and we could like hack on some stuff. Do we think it's fair to try and push on something like this while we are there?
That could be fun.
You might you might not be available for that. I don't know. So I guess it's kind of more of a level of comfort of like how do we need to review this? Who needs to be involved in reviewing this? That sort of stuff. So
I don't think I need to be the gatekeeper necessarily on this, or at least not the only gatekeeper. It's a script, and it looks like Christoph has already weighed in a little bit, which is both good and trouble for Arnaud. So sorry, I meant that as a compliment, Christoph. Yeah, we can totally get together and work through this and see if we're all happy with it and if we have any other questions around it. And if so, maybe even push it from there, approve it from there. I'm fine. I'll be at Contributor Summit on Monday for sure. I don't know what the agenda is going to be. I haven't really looked at it yet, but if we pulled aside an hour to do this, I'd be cool.
Okay. I think that's fair.
I think Arnaud is in fact going to be there. If I recall, I've spoken to a lot of people about who is or isn't going to be there, so I apologize if I get that wrong, but I thought he said he was going to be there.
So Arnaud says most of the problems faced are related to authorization and authentication. So maybe that will lead me to just move on to where we are with managing Google Group membership via API. So Dims, maybe you want to speak to where we're at with this.
So we have the script running. 2 of us can run the scripts right now. If anybody else wants to be able to run the script, just let me know your GPG key so I can.
Who are the 2 people? Is it?
Me and Christoph.
Okay.
So it's easy to find out. Basically, the list of people who have GPG keys in the repository can view the script. Can view the token file. So you can do crypt unlock and you can run the reconcile.go. There's a small README and we have there is a groups.yaml which has a list of the list of Google groups and list of members for each Google group. So it's basically shipped at this point. What we do need to do is go look at where we use the public Google groups and switch them over to this one.
So on that topic, I've gone through most of the GCP projects that we already have where we're using these groups for IAM permissions, and I have converted most of them. I've got a couple of scripts left that I need to finish and get pushed and checked by all your eyes about this, but I've converted a bunch of them already, like the staging repos and stuff. It's the main Kubernetes public project that needs to be changed a couple more, and some of I think in fact I did the org level ones already too. So I'm working on scripting all of that so that it's completely reproducible. And the last places to find will be like docs and stuff. I've Git grep for it, but I don't know what else might have persisted beyond this repo.
All right. Aaron, you might be able to help a little bit more, vetting it?
It is possible.
It's either you or Justin, I think.
This is the sort of thing I could probably help with in person at KubeCon. I get on a plane tomorrow, so I can't trust myself to commit to anything today.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I'll put it on your plate at some point.
I am happy to like continue to ask us like what's done and audit what remains. So it sounds like we can close out managing the Google groups automatically. Like this is done. You've implemented it.
So I simply don't know if there's an automatic mechanism for finding all of the dangling references, short of deleting them and waiting for people to scream.
Right.
Okay. You all get to hear me use my mechanical keyboard. It is rainbow.
Good job. So one question I did have related to this was, do we want to do something similar for creating the GCR repositories as well?
The staging repos? Yes, I think we probably do at the end of the day want metadata that drives the reconciliation. I mean, I have a PR that is either merged or is in queue. Sorry.
But sorry, before we jump to that, can we just close out the rest of the access related stuff? So we had something about scraping all of the IAM policies, which I thought might help us identify whether or not we've gotten all of the groups over.
Yes. So Hippie, I don't know if Hippie's here. So you have a basic script. It's been a while since we circled back to that. Do you have any updates or a time frame for getting to that?
Yeah, if you'll click on the last commit, you can see the changes.
Nice.
Okay, so it looks like we have this PR here, initial auditing.
I've addressed most of your concerns, Tim, but maybe
awesome.
we can.
I have been using that PR sort of manually as I was converting the Google Groups and stuff over. Has been very useful.
Yay. I haven't got around to doing the infra, like putting the cron job up. Maybe we can do that while we're face to face.
Cron job's a separate thing. I want to at least make sure we've got this dumped. Hippie, it looks like you need to redo your commits so you get the CNCF Skybot out of your commit history, because that's probably tripping up.
All right, I'll remove those co-authors.
Yeah, no sweat.
Okay, so Tim, do you feel like you need a final pass on this PR?
Yeah, I want to take a look through it and make sure that it captures everything that I know, because I probably know which resources we're using better than most, so I'll make sure that it's got the audit dumps for everything.
Okay. To me, if we dump this, I'm going to feel a lot more comfortable about deleting things and seeing if people scream. Because
totally,
if we can't audit it, it doesn't really exist.
Yep.
Basically. Okay, thank you for that. And then setting up a job to run this automatically. We'll do a native cron job. We got an issue for that. Cool. Okay, so we were talking about GCR stuff. Let's talk about setting up GCR repos.
So I changed the ensure staging repo script to, instead of taking an argument, to actually just loop over all of the known repos. So to a first approximation, we have metadata now. You just go add an entry to that array and rerun the script, and it will rectify everything. It's not exactly the same as having a nice YAML file that we can slurp in, but it's a step in that direction. My goal is to get to an ensure everything script, which if anybody's unsure about what's going on, they can just run that, and at least it reconciles everything in one direction. We can then talk about the other direction.
So just to recap from the comment above, this is all about GCR repos that are just for the K8s GCR IO repo, right?
Staging, yeah.
Yeah, these are the staging for all the various subprojects. And I think we should be relatively loose in who we give staging repos to if they need them, if they can justify them.
Loose in staging repos in what sense?
In
for
the
arbitrary
sense of,
subprojects, or
like anybody who can come in with a subproject or a repo who wants to produce a container artifact or some other artifact should be able to get a staging repo with relatively low hurdles. We can define exactly what that means, but I want to make the point that it should not be a very high bar.
Okay, I feel like that kind of contradicts the comment above. We're saying out of scope for now is the ability to create repos to support arbitrary projects. You're saying you actually want to create staging repos to support arbitrary projects. And can you just help me understand what is the difference between a staging repo and a repo that people can push and consume images from?
A staging repo is a repo that I would give write access to people who have otherwise no elevated privileges within the organization, and they can push their stuff to that GCR repo, and then the image promoter moves stuff based on a PR from the staging repo into the production repo. And the PR is reviewed by people who have the elevated permission to make sure that the production repo is safe.
Right. The other way to look at it is we are trying to get people who are using Docker Hub and Quay a better way to do this in a community fashion, right?
Right. So
and also to serve non-GCR stuff too. Justin added this with the work to make it a plain old GCS bucket available too. So people who need to serve non-container artifacts can do that.
Yeah.
Okay. I apologize if I'm like stuck in the past here. I guess I was under the impression that we still wanted to get this process correct for the core Kubernetes artifacts like etcd and all of the images for Kubernetes, and that we still weren't yet confident that we had that ironed out, working, end-to-end tested, all of that stuff. And like we wanted to get that first before we opened up the gates for sub-projects and whatnot.
So we have anecdata that it works. Linus says so. We do not have the tests yet. Hopefully Linus can get to that. Otherwise, we will have to re-resource that. Once we have those tests, then we will have full confidence in the promoter's ability to move containers from staging GCRs into production GCRs. But Linus has already demonstrated that it does work.
Yeah, right? I think Tim summed it up quite nicely there. I mean, the only remaining item is the end-to-end test that really tests the whole process. But that is something that I need to work on at some point. Hopefully, though, I do plan to land it within, I don't know, after KubeCon, because there's KubeCon next week, but it's going to take some time.
So there are remaining questions as to, like, do we throw open the floodgates right away and let people start promoting before EDE tests are done? I'm a little anxious about that. What are we going to do with all the existing images? Are we going to load them into one sort of omnibus legacy staging repo and then have everybody use more specific staging repos going forward? That seems like the easiest path. The alternative would be to actually go through all of the thousands of images that we've got today and bucket them up into where they would have gone if they'd had staging repos and move them individually. I really don't feel inclined to do that work.
Right, but I think that shortest path is the right thing to do, just because we don't have enough bandwidth on organizing all that, all the existing stuff. So we have to grandfather in all the existing images to some, new one, and then go from there.
Right. So we could start the bulk import, but it's going to be a game of catch up until we're ready to like flip the switch between the old system and the new system. And I don't think we're ready to do that until we have the testing in place. So we're really gating on the testing. I'm happy to add more staging repos in the meantime for people who need it like imminently. And there's been a few cases like COPS and other places where they want to serve artifacts today and get them off of privately owned accounts and those sorts of things. That's fine. That's low impact. Now that we have everything scripted, it's relatively easy, right? Switching all the Google groups over was really changing the script and rerunning it.
Okay. I apologize, guys. I still feel like I am like way far behind. Like I must not be watching. I really haven't looked at a whole bunch of PRs flowing into this repo in the past 2 weeks. I'm kind of catching up to it today. So I'm just trying to understand like what's the basic thing that we would get done that if we were to open the floodgates, we could point people to say like copy paste this approach and you two can add add your things? I guess I'm kind of unclear on what the next step is.
So if we open the doors to more staging repos, what they get is the ability to push GCR images and GCS artifacts that they can use. They're not k8s.gcr.io. They are k8s-staging-foobar. And if that's okay for these projects to do their development work, that's cool. We're not yet ready to promote those into the production spaces yet.
So let me just walk through that for a second. So in order to denote that a given set of people working on, let's say, cluster API provider AWS, right? Let's say they've got some artifacts they want to push into a staging repo. Would we first have to create like a Google group or G Suite group? Okay, so we'd use DIMS's tool to set up that these humans are authorized to push to this staging repo. And then we would we would PR into a bash script that says this staging repo should exist. Do we have something that says this staging repo is gated, is like tied to this Google group?
Yes, that's all part of the same script.
Okay, that's all part of that same script. And then they can manually build and push images from their laptops to that staging repo to their heart's content.
That's right.
And then we would be waiting on end-to-end testing of the container image promoter before we feel like we're comfortable using that to promote from the staging repos to the production repos.
That's right.
And is running the container image promoter to do that? Is that okay? Wait, that happens in response to right. That's a prow job. Okay.
So there's two things that I think we need before we're ready to go with the production side of it. One is the EDE testing, and the other is a disaster recovery strategy, which we haven't really worked through. Like, we don't have what is our backup of this?
Yeah, that second part is much more involved, and I think the latest thought on that was possibly like promoting to a graveyard / like backup repository in case we do something really bad. But that's kind of a stopgap, more like it's not a full.
It's better than nothing, which is what we've got today.
Yeah.
Okay, so I feel like it just walked us through how it's super easy for new people to migrate new images over, and then what would be the steps to migrate the existing images over to this process?
So, we would need to basically copy over all the existing images to a new, let's call it like Google Containers staging or something. And then, so that's like, hundreds of images, right?
Thousands.
Or thousands, sorry. So all of that will need to be like read in or written to a YAML. So there's like an open issue for adding a feature to the promoter where it can basically read or snapshot a repository and just write it down, all the contents into a YAML file. And then we'll start tracking that. Like the promoter will start looking at that file and then say, okay, any changes here. Actually, it's more like we don't want people to make changes to the old one. And the promoter will look at basically a huge YAML file with all of the old images and make sure that nothing changes beyond that. So if people try to push new images without using this image promotion process for the existing, old images, then it'll get rejected. Like, it'll revert back to that snapshotted state. And then we're going to push people to say, please stop making the old one get any bigger. Please use your own sub-project staging repos to add new images. And at that point, we'll have like basically the promoter run against that really large YAML file with all the old images plus any number of new sub-project YAML files.
Okay.
So we already have like the 3 that's in K8s K8s.io, that repo.
Great.
but nobody's been using them as far as I know. But those are the three that are like the new places for those sub projects. But yeah, hopefully people will stop adding new images to K8s GCR IO, and at that point, once we confirm that nobody's adding any new images to K8s GCR IO, we'll flip the switch to make that vanity domain point to the new staging repo that where we grandfathered in all the old images.
The new production repo, you mean?
Or sorry, yeah, the new production repo.
Yeah. So we can do the like flip and then check again and make sure that nothing has changed and then disable the old one.
Right.
So we're just going to have to, as we get all the testing and everything in place, we just have to declare like Wednesday as moving day, and no images are being pushed into the GCR, the old GCR, while we move everything over and make sure that we do our best to synchronize.
I mean, like the making sure that no new images land in the old repository, I think that'll basically be automated by the promoter doing its thing. If you just let it run, every day, and people push stuff there and they're like, hey, how come my image got deleted or something? Or I mean, even if you don't like enable like bidirectional syncing, like if you just have a periodic job that, for example, warns us of any new images that are not in the manifest, like I think that'll be enough. Like we'll be able to see, okay, like images, X, Y, and Z were added yesterday, but they're not in this YAML. Let's please ping the people who are still doing this old way of manually pushing.
Yep. So we'll have to just declare a moving day and then just sort of a couple of weeks of vigilance afterwards to make sure that we kill off the tail.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm kind of like, Tim, you like said the number thousands off the top of your head, and we're talking about old repos and preventing people like, I guess I don't know what old places you're talking about. And so I'm curious, like what, could you give us some example of some of the images you're thinking of? And I guess I'd also like to understand, like, why would we not just like revoke credentials so that people couldn't push to the old place or something?
So the images that we're talking about here is everything under K8s.gcr.io.
Okay.
So, and that's, for compatibility reasons, we're reluctant to delete those old images, even though we know there are CVEs in some of them and we shouldn't be using them. We really have sort of taken a policy of not deleting old images. So we have to move everything under K8s.gcr.io. As for revoking credentials, we weren't very careful in granting credentials in the first place because it was all in the family internally. And so it's going to be a little bit more challenging. But if the promoter knows how to slurp out of a GCR into a YAML, we can just diff the results over the course of a few days and say, hey, who added this thing?
Like, there might be a lot of tags, but I guess I'm feeling like everything that goes in there, doesn't it all just come from the Kubernetes repo? Sorry, maybe I just used the word just, but I'm thinking of images that are built by our release process for the various Kubernetes components, as well as images that are built for our end-to-end tests. I can't think of anything else that lives in those places, but I'm probably missing stuff, right?
I can give you a number. Just give me a second.
Would it be interesting to audit what we're currently pushing, like wrapping our release process to see what we're pushing and auditing, and also separately watching what people are pulling, so we see what's in use? You're asking to see what we've...
Sadly, I don't think GCR gives us that kind of logging capability.
So that's something that Justin and I have been talking about idly, of figuring out if we can get a way to get the logging out of there. It's not something we're going to have on day one. I can tell you, looking at the existing K8s.gcr.io, there are 475 named repositories, and then each of those repositories has some number of tagged images underneath them, right? Cluster Autoscaler, I just clicked on randomly, has 101 tags in there, okay, right? So it's probably, if you assume that 100 is the average, you're probably in the order of 5,000 total image tags through the repo.
Okay. All right. Here's a part of me that wonders if, I don't know, I'll talk about it offline, I guess. We've set up all of our images in the test infra repo are now built by like a single thing. It's under automation. So we don't trust humans to build and push the images. I'm wondering if we could identify all of these images and have something similar built so that then we can feel more comfortable revoking people's credentials because it's done by a bot.
Yeah, I think we can totally do that. I think some of it's going to be case by case. Honestly, I think once we throw the switch, we'll be able to get most people to switch pretty quickly. I don't think it's going to be that big of an issue, especially if we're giving out staging repos for people to be able to push to. Like right now, for example, whenever Core DNS as a sub-project wants to push their image, they call me and I push it for them. And they would be perfectly happy to be able to push it to their own repo and then file a PR to have it promote.
Right.
Okay, that is understandable, and that gives me a little more context. Okay, so there are more images than what we built. Okay, because I feel like we talked about moving the old stuff and the new stuff. If we set up staging repos for the new stuff, it kind of doesn't really mean much until we flip the vanity domain over, I guess, is kind of what I'm hearing.
They can use the staging repos for other purposes, like for sharing in images amongst themselves or getting testing done or whatever. Like that's fine. They're just not the promoted ones.
Okay, because I guess it feels like we believe that theoretically all of the pieces should work. I want to get us to a point where we're actually getting some usage of the whole end-to-end loop. And so it kind of feels like the sub-project path might be a start, but it still doesn't get us to the promotion aspect of that path.
Yeah, unfortunately, the promotion stuff is blocked, as you said, on the ED testing and the DR stuff. Until we have those things, I'm not comfortable flipping the vanity domain. We can start promoting things into the new repo, but it won't have a friendly name. It'll be something, I'm forgetting what we call it.
And can you help me understand why is DR a concern for you? Is the nightmare scenario that the container image promoter goes rogue and deletes everything in the production repos?
Exactly.
Okay.
Imagine what happens if K8s.gcr.io turns up empty one morning.
Right.
Yeah, that thought is so scary that no matter how well we test this thing, we just need some sort of strategy around it before we flip the switch, so to speak.
Okay, I think that is fair. Do we feel like we want anything else to talk about on container image promoter? To me, it sounds an awful lot like next steps are maybe, again, if we get together in person, we could maybe walk through the mechanics of migrating the legacy stuff a little bit more, or we could help hack on some end-to-end testing to give us confidence in the promoter. Those to me feel like the two big
I'm not sure if hacking will be realistic at Contrib Summit, but we could definitely we could talk through the DR strategy.
Okay. Yes, that sounds like a good idea. Okay. So I was focused just on images and GCR stuff. When we talk about artifacts, you would mention non-image artifacts as well. And so we've got two things around setting up GCS buckets. Is this related to that?
I can barely see your screen. Hold on.
Sorry.
No, it's not your fault. I took it out of full screen.
Yeah, this just says set up a GCS bucket.
So we added, I don't think Justin's here, is he? No. We added support for GCS to the same staging. Oh, this is for the apt and the RPM stuff. So we added GCS support to all the staging scripts. So anybody who creates a staging repo gets both a GCR and a GCS bucket now. We didn't talk about apt or RPM specifically. Justin has been pursuing his load balancer to expose artifacts with the intention of expending the image promoter to also promote GCS images. But again, he's not here, so I'm assuming that he's just dead busy on KubeCon stuff right now.
Okay, and it's probably on me. I don't think I actually managed to tag in the work that Justin had on like getting the artifact stuff up and running, because I feel like that's on the critical path for that. Is that right? Okay. So I'm assuming we can't really talk much about where we are with billing with Justin not around.
I think, what did we talk about last time? It was really like, can we define the queries that we're most interested in? And we had a set of those. And then it's really Justin doing or Justin teaching other people to do the Data Studio setup.
We'll just run through what we said. Let's see. So we want to figure out if we can get billing per namespace.
That's for the cluster stuff. Like, push that for now.
Okay, right. And then we had something about we want to understand if we can break down billing from a per bucket perspective or per path perspective, or it sounded like we weren't really sure what breakdown we could even get. Yes,
I'm still not sure because we don't have really enough data to figure it out. Okay. All of our billing is coming in at 0, so.
Okay. And right, we need to sort of find a way to take the readout that you are giving us each meeting, Tim, and reconcile that with the report that Justin generated.
Right.
I think more people here need to understand how to generate or see or access that report.
That's right. I don't know how to do it either. Justin did this prototype and that's where it sits.
Okay. Find Justin and shake him until issues come out of him. Got it.
Gently shake him. I need him. Please don't shake too hard.
Let's see. I believe, okay, so I was going around and trying to take inventory of all of the cluster-based infrastructure that we would want to migrate over. I have not yet created issues for each of these things. I will do that sometime soon. Okay. Those are all of the issues except for document the requirements for the CNCF spending money on SIGs. I think this was something, Dims, we were supposed to add to the K8s Infra charter.
Yeah, I haven't done that yet.
Okay. I will give you a friendly poke in person next week. And then there had been a discussion of a GCP project to try and do something for our PE. Anybody have context on this? Let's see. I personally feel as though this is seen as a nice to have. This is not something I feel is critical for us to accomplish before we throw open the gates.
I agree. I did want to ask if people think that I'm demanding too much. Eric thinks I am.
Could you maybe summarize what it is you are demanding?
The summary, and I don't want to mischaracterize, I don't know if Eric is here, but it was basically, can we have a project and a few people who have access to it and we'll go to town on our own? And my response was, oh, no, you can have a space once you can tell me which Google groups are governing which permissions and what you're going to do with it. And there's a script to recreate it should anything happen, and we can all audit the script and understand what's going on. And he said, that sounds like a lot of work. And I said, it is a lot of work, but what we have today is crazy and nobody understands what's going on or who's supposed to have access to it.
I agree with your stance.
I don't think the two of you are that far off, to be honest, Tim.
I agree. I just don't want hand-configured stuff. I want them to say, this is how it works, and here's the script that sets it up, and here's the fine-grained groups that we need to govern access.
Right. So they do have a script. They don't have fine-grained groups. And what they're saying is that anybody on call should be able to do whatever they need to do to bring things back up when things go bad. That's the problem there, right?
I don't think you are far off. I think there's just some still need to actually document what it is and go through the process. Dim's just kind of got the group reconciliation thing working. I still feel like we kind of lack a good onboarding ramp to describe here's the step-by-step process, which you actually kind of enumerated there in that comment. So that might be a thing I can try pulling out.
And also, once we have Arnaud's create a cluster script lockdown, we can be able to say, don't go create your own cluster. You need to use this script.
Right.
Yes. It enforces all the best practices.
Right. And the reason why I am kind of partial towards this one is because this is when we can add non-Googlers to on-call. And that is definitely a good milestone to reach.
Man, I'm with you. I don't even know what RBE is, but if I can get a place where you can carry it, win.
This is why I want to give a little more context, because to me, I feel like when I think of giving non-Googlers on call, I think of doing this for PROW. It's unclear to me how useful this is for RBE. RBE stands for Remote Build Execution, and it's basically it's a pool of compute for us to run Bazel builds. So instead of the majority of our PROW jobs, right? You have a PROW cluster, it receives API events, and then it goes and schedules pods to run in another build cluster, right? And this is something even different from that. It's just some cloud of, let's call it Bazel instances that are living out there. And we just run Bazel builds over here, which is cool and all, but nothing to do, it doesn't really gain us any of the on-call benefits. If anything, I feel like it means we start spending community money on compute to run some Bazel jobs. And I feel like we're not yet at the point where we have decided what community money we want to spend on which jobs or suites of tests. And it is unclear to me whether just because they are written on Bazel and it's really easy to create this Bazel RBE thing, whether that means they should go first and get carte blanche to spend community money.
So this is the hierarchy of delegation, right? Where I trust, say, you and Eric to be gatekeepers of what should and shouldn't be run in RBE, and we'll set up the permissions such that you guys can make the further decisions as to what's in that project, and I don't want to be part of that. And you stand in for the royal you, right? Which involves everybody who is authorized and able to do this work. I just want to make sure that from an infrastructure point of view, I have a reasonable grip on why we're doing things and how we're doing things.
Right. We're mostly in alignment. I just feel like if we were to remove RBE as a word for a second and just talk about we want to create a Kubernetes cluster to run PROW jobs. Think of it like that. And I still feel like we haven't yet answered the question of how are we going to figure out which PROW jobs the community is spending its money on. And I don't feel like it is SIG testing's mandate to say which PROW jobs the community should be spending its money on. I feel like that was maybe more a policy for this group to figure out.
I would like to get to a place where we say it is SIG testing's responsibility and here's the guidelines that we give them, but within those guidelines, somebody in SIG testing should be able to make that call, right? Somebody sends a PROW job to go test GKE, they should get shot down, and somebody sends a PROW job to go do some other testing of Kubernetes open source, then rock on. Right? I mean, I don't want to be involved in that loop.
It's a really good question, and that's why I feel like we're not going to answer it today. Because, for example, I don't think SIG testing has a say in which jobs the release team deems most appropriate for release blocking jobs, right? SIG testing provides the tools to help measure which jobs are healthy and the infrastructure to say which jobs are owned by whom, but it's been the release team's responsibility to say, we're going to pay attention to these jobs and we're not going to pay attention to these other jobs. Similarly, like we want to enable people to run jobs on their Kubernetes clusters, right? We have the ability for Proud to run different jobs on different Kubernetes clusters. This is more about for the Kubernetes cluster that the community itself is paying money for. What jobs should be running on that cluster?
Sure. So, okay, I'll make more nuance. I don't care if it's SIG testing, SIG release, or some confederation between them who makes the decision. I don't think it should be this group who's deciding what tests are worth paying for and what tests are not. I think we should provide guidance on like the tests should be valuable and they should provide real information for us and they should not be egregiously expensive. And you guys figure out how that applies to the actual tests. Does that make sense?
It does. I guess I'll have to mull over like what's the appropriate place to make those sorts of decisions, because yeah, the common sense, like the community is not going to pay for a 5,000 node scalability job, right?
Well, it might. We have to decide that.
Yeah, and I don't know who's supposed to decide that between testing, release, a working group, the steering committee, or what.
Well, so there's a case where like a 5,000 node scalability test is egregiously expensive and we need to decide, that may be the sort of thing that gets escalated to here and even to steering to decide, is this something that our community is willing to pay for given that we claim to support 5,000 nodes, right? And then, extend further. Are we willing to support a 10,000 node scalability test even though we don't claim to support 10,000 nodes?
Fair.
Right.
Okay, and this may be me future tripping. Like for me, this is about, I don't want to waste the community's money. And until I know how much money we're spending on this stuff, maybe it's a moot point.
Sure, but also to be clear, the donation that was made was based on the money that we're spending today, which includes things like the 5,000 node scalability test.
Okay.
So we're sort of set up for some of these things, but I called out the 10,000 node case, like not that anybody has asked for it, but you can imagine that somebody came along and said, hey, let's do a 10,000 node test. Like, well, we don't actually claim to support 10,000 nodes and we're not funded to run a 10,000 node test, so we have to say no to that one. But the 5,000 node was considered as part of the budget.
Okay. All right. I still feel like I would like to punt this to we'll figure this out once we've figured out billing and once we've figured out how to stand up Kubernetes clusters. Because I view this as like, it's a different cloud service entirely from GCS, GCR, GKE.
So mechanisms aside, you're not in favor of proceeding with RBE right now?
It is unclear to me what the advantage is, especially until we can actually, like, this will cost us compute for sure.
Okay. Presumably, whatever compute we're spending on it today is sort of shadow paid for by Google, and we'd be moving it into the same budget pool that we already accounted for. It's possible that in the donation that we missed some of the accounting. We're not going to know that until we get to the totality of it and realize that $3 million a year wasn't enough. It needs to be $5 million.
Right. This also may just be me really wanting to try and focus on just the critical things to allow us to open the gates for everybody else. And this sort of distracts me personally from the focus, but.
I kind of agree with that. Like, while I'm eager to help people set things up, I don't feel like we've got the baseline done yet.
Right.
And I'm wary of being too distracted or too divergent, right? If they go off and set up their own clusters for stuff, and we haven't really codified what best practices are for cluster administration, then we're back to where we are today with sort of shadow IT.
Right. So I will discuss this with Eric offline, but I feel like we'll get to this real soon now, just as soon as we clarify all of our billing questions, clarify our questions on disaster recovery for artifact storage and promotion, clarify how we're going to launch Kubernetes clusters, and then we can get to this when we start migrating over infrastructure as part of the next milestone.
My inclination is to agree with you. In the priority stack, this is not at the top. And we are making progress. I know from the outside it seems like it's very, very slow progress, but it's a handful of volunteers who put aside a couple hours a week to work on this.
Yeah, hey, huge thanks to Dims and everybody who pushed on actually like auditing our Google groups and creating a script to magically create them. We did get that thing done in 2 weeks, like we said we would, which was cool. I believe that is everything in this milestone. We have 6 minutes left.
Goodbye.
Anybody have anything else?
I'd like to see get a few big screens for where we get to pair, so we can have point and conversation on code. If I can arrange that.
Question related. Sorry, say that again.
For a face-to-face for the hallway track, rather than crowding around small one laptop screen, I'd see if we can't get a larger screen.
That would be helpful. Do you want to try taking the lead on like coordinating face-to-face?
That I will.
Awesome.
Thanks, Hippie.
Yeah, and Arno, we don't yet have a description of the clusters. I will try and take a pass at scraping information about the clusters as I look to create issues for all of the infra services that are running on the clusters. Anything else?
One thing, while
Thanks, everybody.
on policy, basically, one thing that is still problematic is that came up with the Kubernetes IO redirecting thing is what do we want to automate in terms of deployment and what is the process in general. For example, GCS web was deemed a one-off deployment, so that would circumvent any deployment and automation and testing. So what's our stance on what should be done, and is that already codified somewhere sort of in someone's head, or where are we at that point basically?
It is not codified in my head, and can you so where Tim sort of laid out in that issue comment, if you would like to stand up a new GCP project, you need to give us, people and a group and a purpose, and it has to be done with scripts. Are you trying to suggest that we need to enumerate similar things for each piece of cluster-based infrastructure that we migrate over?
Yeah, so that was basically, we have two things that are sort of in flight in terms of first projects that might be migrated to the new infrastructure, the new cluster. Once we have a script that automatically creates that. One is GCS web. The other one might be the shortener or the go.kubernetes.io, basically.
Right.
Where GCS web is as simple, at least that's the consensus, it seems, that we don't need to automate or test the deployment. And then the question is, what is the testing that needs to be done in terms of pushing from staging to production? Do we need a staging environment for the different things? And how would that look compared to what we currently have?
Yeah, so some of the examples like GCS Web today are not great examples of how to do things in a sane way. Like if somebody builds a new GCS Web binary and they push it and there's no canary really for GCS Web as far as I know, it's really push it, see if it works. If it doesn't work, roll it back, which isn't great. I'm wondering how much we should move the goalposts while we're also moving the infrastructure, or whether we should bring it over and say, well, it's not worse than it used to be, but it should be better, or whether we want to raise the bar at the same time.
I personally would prefer not to raise the bar. I feel like it is unfair to expect that we should not hand over ownership of stuff to the community until it reaches such and such a bar. It's how it is supported today. And I feel like we can talk about raising the bar going forward. So the second example you gave of like replacing K8s IO redirector would be a good example of like, we're kind of redoing that piece of infrastructure. We're replacing like a big old Nginx config that was totally just done by hand with something that can be held to a higher standard. And that sounds great. But I feel like for migrating what we have, we should migrate what we have first.
Okay, so basically the overall stance would be what we have currently, move that as is, so we don't introduce more hurdles than are necessary, and everything that is basically redone or at least refactored partially, we need to figure out what an actual staging deployment looks like and how to automate that so it's not being Tim pushing to or doing a manual deploy, basically.
Yes. I mean, we do have the option.
Although,
sorry, Aaron, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, the idea here is it can be more than Tim doing a manual deploy, because it can be a group of people who are named in the group's YAML file that have access to this particular cluster can do a deploy. And I think we could talk down the line about how we might want to structure all of these things so that we can do a more GitOps model of deployment of these various pieces of infrastructure. But I kind of feel as though that needs to be decided amongst the people who want to support these services.
So in terms of timing, we have the other path, which is still open to us. The old clusters are still running and probably will be for at least weeks, if not a couple months while we finish the transition. It's not implausible that we could switch over go.k8s.io in the existing clusters and then bring that forward. But if we're going to switch it to the new mechanism, well, the PR is open and we've had comments on that PR, right? Like, I don't think that's an invalid approach for something of this scale.
Okay, that makes sense. So if we do a face-to-face and we discuss something, I would love to get something like at least a few points that we try as a goalposts type things, like what do we need as a minimum thing for new things to come into the new cluster, and also what is the general idea and goal for moving towards a more GitOps type model, so that we move away from single people being the single point of failure and towards the PR, and the PR review is the deploy in itself type thing.
Yep, that sounds
I agree. The latter seems like a wonderful goal, but probably is not something we want to put into the current clusters. I'm getting kicked out. Yep. I'll see you guys in Barcelona.
Yeah, see ya.
Bye. See you all soon. Thank you so much.